G'day, my name's Neen James, and as an attention expert, I'm always looking for people or brands who are paying attention to what really matters. Whether it is the product that they deliver, the community they've created, or in this case with Tamsen, is it about something that is really new in the world and very, very sexy and cool? What I want to do is tell you a little bit about my friend Tamsen. She's part idea whisperer, part change strategist, and part magpie. Now, being an Australian, I obviously love that analogy. Tamsen helps people find the power to master change. She will tell you that everything she's learned about speaking, people, or change, she learned at Weight Watchers. She's an awesome coach. She's the producer of TEDx Cambridge, wicked smart, and also the creator of The Red Thread, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. Tamsen, thank you so much for joining us. I so appreciate you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So our book, Attention, in one of the things we're doing is making some distinctions between attention and attentiveness. And as you know, I work with Tom from Edison Research, someone who's near and dear to your heart. And we've been able to really get some more clarity around this. But let me start by asking you, what does attention mean to you?
Attention to me means understanding where the change needs to happen. Really, actually, it's more about understanding where somebody is and helping fulfill what it is that they're looking for in that moment.
Nice.
So it's a combination to me of both observing and acting, even if that action is inaction, is not acting, because sometimes that's what people need.
Is it different to attentiveness?
I believe so, yes. I think the way that I would articulate the difference is that attentiveness has a more ongoing aspect to it for me. And people may interchange them the opposite way, but attentiveness to me is much more it's more of a boundary scan. It's more of understanding how a person or something is happening within context of other things, and usually over time.
In the book, I'm defining it that attention is about being present and attentiveness is a process.
I like that.
So I think there is some distinction around that. But one of the things you're really good at is you're good at getting people to the heart of an idea and then being able to share that with the world. You also create, and you're always looking for people who have unique ideas in the world, as your role as a producer of TEDx in Cambridge. So can you maybe tell people a little bit more about Red Thread and how did that come about? Because this has really been helping change not only the lives of people in the audiences, but with my clients who've worked with you, you've given them such clarity to get attention for something they're very passionate about. So can you talk to us more about the Red Thread process?
Sure. So that's also very near and dear to my heart. I started to notice something as I was working with people. It really did start way back in my days as a brand marketer. I saw it happen again and again with folks at Weight Watchers. It's certainly something I saw as I was working with people at TEDx Cambridge, was that there was this gap between how they wanted to be seen and how they actually were, that there was this gap between them. And I was obsessed with closing that gap. Like, why is that happening? Where is it happening? How can I help close it? Because I've never seen a gap I didn't want to close somehow. And what I started to notice is, particularly when it came, the fastest way to help people close that gap was to understand why the gap was there in the first place. And what I figured out was it was because they hadn't in some way articulated a way to think about themselves or the world or their idea or the product or service or the way that they fit in it. And so in marketing, people refer to it as a brand. If we're talking about individuals, it's a personal brand. If it's speakers, it's the message or it's the big idea. Regardless, though, people knew they needed it. Sometimes they thought they had it, but when they actually tried to apply it, it didn't work. And I just really wanted to figure out what that was. And what I started to realize was that it was because people were trying to find one big thing. What is the idea? And what I realized as I started to reverse engineer off the work that I had done over time, and this really did come down to Weight Watchers, like what is it that somebody had to hear before they'd be convinced of something? That an idea is actually the combination of a few different concepts, that you can't really come up with a message unless you know what's the goal that the message will help with? What's the problem that's getting in the way of that goal? What's this new, what's a core belief or a new idea? What is the solution to that? And then how do people interact with that solution? So once I figured out that those were the pieces, I was like, okay, well, that's it. Like if I can help people break down those components, we can go back to what that is. And once you've got that clarity internally, it becomes so much easier to get that clarity externally. And once you've got internal clarity that leads to external clarity, attention follows.
Agreed. Why red thread? Why did you call it red thread?
I love the story. So I first heard the phrase in the context of how we use it, which is, what is the red thread? What does something mean? What's the message? What's the theme? What's the idea? And the first time I heard the red thread used that way was I was talking with a client who was in Sweden, of all places. And I asked her, I was like, well, what does that mean? And she said, it means a message and a theme. And I'm like, I get that, but where does it come from? And so I was eagerly awaiting her answer. And she says, I don't know. I'm like, damn it. So instead of an answer to that question, I got this mystery that I wanted to solve. So I found out after doing some research that while there are many red threads in all sorts of philosophies and cultures around the world, that particular one comes from the myth of the Minotaur and the Labyrinth, where Theseus had to defeat the Minotaur, but more importantly, he had to find his way back out in order to accomplish what he needed to accomplish to save his city. And the way he found his way back out was that in addition to the sword that he carried to slay the Minotaur, he also carried in with him a ball of red thread, which he unwound on the way in so that he could follow it on the way out. And I love to use it for this process because it's exactly the same thing. I like to use it because what we're doing when we're helping someone to find their red thread is by figuring out what those pieces of the idea are, or figuring out how somebody got into it in the first place. So that then they can, once they have that clarity, now they can follow it and take it back out into the world.
I love the process, having experienced it myself and still in evolution of it, and having been fortunate to be part of your Red Thread retreat and our one-on-one coaching. And I know my clients who've worked with you have loved it as well. I know audiences love it when you share it with them. And also too, I notice it's something you're looking for when you're looking for your TEDx potential speakers as well. When you think about the work that you do, what is the most important thing that you have to pay attention to, Tamsen?
I want to always pay attention to how I can best honor the red thread of the person I'm working with. One of the reasons why I love this idea of a red thread versus a brand, for instance, is that a brand is a finite, separate thing, and it's permanent, it's seared into something. And it's really hard to figure out how you get two brands, if they're these separate, permanent, seared in things, to work together. But when you think about red threads, when you think about threads, you're already in a situation where you can think about how they weave together, how they wrap around each other. Right. And so that's really important for me to pay attention to, because I'm always looking and listening for what are the problems that this person is drawn to solve, and what are the unique sets of skills, and what are those beliefs that are very important to them. Because if I am working with someone and helping them find their own, I want to make sure that we're making that shine through as brightly as we possibly can. Because the more that meaning that's encapsulated in the red thread is clear, the more that the people that message is meant for will be drawn to it. It becomes easier for that attention to happen between people, because they start to recognize, like, this ties to what I do. This ties to what I believe. Oh, you do something that helps solve a problem I have, or vice versa. So I want to make sure I'm always paying attention to that.
Have you ever had a time in your experience or your career where you've had to refocus your attention and something specific happened, whether it was, a result, a strategy, or bottom line? Tell me about that.
It's happened a lot in my career, and it's probably one of the reasons why I wanted to figure out the red thread in the first place, because I want to be able to explain all these weird shifts that I made in my career. So I think the first and most central one was that I grew up and I spent a lot of years from high school through to college, through grad school. So this is like a period of about 10 years, wanting to be a museum director, art museum director. Now, in case you haven't noticed, I am not currently an art museum director. And honestly, it came because I had to realize that where my attention was drawn over and over and over and over again was not to the art, not to the fundraising, not to the mechanics or the importance of museums in the world, all of which are incredibly important to me and valuable to me. I was drawn to why more people didn't feel the same way. And so, that original shift from working in a museum. So the first big shift was that I went from working into a museum to working in a college that was actually a performing arts college. So, and I was like, well, it's just a different kind of arts, was like the first justification I gave myself. But it was because I realized that it wasn't the surface thing that mattered. It was this core thing that mattered to me. I wanted to help people. I wanted to help institutions, organizations get the attention I thought that they deserved, and they thought they deserved.
Right.
And so that first shift when I went to work for what was called the Boston Conservatory was exactly that. This is a wonderful, charming, little tiny conservatory in Boston that had music and dance and musical theater. And this incredibly crowded market, and I really wanted people to get the attention. So every shift after that was this draw to that. And so there was another shift where I was like, well, it doesn't really have to be arts. And so then from there I went to Harvard Medical School. It was like, at which point I totally gave up on ever being in the arts. Like, this is really not what I'm doing. And I had to admit to myself that maybe I was actually about something else. So ultimately my red thread explains all of that. But I think that that's also one of those powerful places where attention on the red thread can come into play, which once you have clarity on what your red thread is, it becomes much, much easier to determine for yourself if you're spending your attention in the right place.
Agree. Absolutely. Thinking about this whole idea of attentiveness, people finding their red thread, is there any final comments you want to make for people about this whole conversation? As you know, I'm creating an attention movement, getting people to really pay attention to what matters so they can create significant moments that matter. Any final thoughts on this topic?
I think what you're focusing on is so critical, because so much of people not getting what they want, not achieving the goals, not fulfilling that potential, not turning the energy they have into power, which is one of my favorite ideas, comes from that accidental misdirection of attention. I don't think it's on purpose at all. I just don't think we've been able to give people ways to define what's valuable to them and ways to stay attentive to it. And so I think is so important. So if you have a way to understand what's meaningful to you and why, then you're able to put into place a system that allows you to keep giving it the attention that it deserves, and I really believe this, because that's the attention you deserve.
Right. Yeah, I love it. Great final thoughts. Thank you so much for being part of today. I'm so grateful for you.
Oh, I love being part of just your life and everything that you're doing. It's so much fun.
Thanks, honey.